It's a podcast. You're listening to Gorehead and the Wiener.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Gorehead and the Wiener. We've got a brand new, fresh episode for you.
Very fresh.
I am Emma, and this is
I am
Chris.
Chris.
Hi.
Hello.
Before we get into the meat of it, I'll just give everyone a really brief intro to what we're doing here. Gorehead and the Wiener, me being the Wiener and Chris being the Gorehead. We plan basically just to talk about horror movies and get me a little bit more accustomed to watching things with gore in it, because I have always loved horror, scary, spooky movies, but the gore aspect I have a very hard time with. So Chris was kind enough. I don't know if kind is the right word, but
Yeah, I want to subject you to traumatizing visuals.
exactly. Basically, we're just increasing the gore each time Chris subjects me to a movie. So then I basically am increasing my tolerance to gore. So if that sounds like something that you would either benefit from, you also want to watch horror movies and you struggle with gore, then I can help you. You can listen before you watch a movie and figure out if you're okay with this, or if you just like hearing about the nerdy aspects of gory movies, because we get into all of that too. So there's a little bit for everybody.
A little bit for everything.
A little bit everything. And hopefully we're entertaining enough that it's not too bad to listen to. We kind of go on little rants sometimes, but for the most part, we're just ranting. Ranting is fun. For the most part, we're just talking about gory movies and my experience with them. So with all of that put aside, we'll get into the movie that we watched a few weeks ago. And that was The Ritual. So I'll hand it all over to Chris, and he can give us a brief spoiler-free movie intro.
Exactly. So it's based on the classic fairy tale premise of the unknowing innocents walking into the woods, where they become lost and come across denizens of the woods who alter their lives in unexpected ways. These four friends must band together to survive the harsh elements of nature and a mysterious creature whose misguided attempts to make lifelong friends ends up splitting the four up emotionally and physically. The eager creature also learns a valuable lesson about appreciating the friends you already have and the price you pay for neglecting them for something new and exciting. Come on a stroll through the forest with a couple of mates, and maybe you'll learn a little bit about yourself, the value of trust, friendship, and what's inside all of us. It sounds like such a wonderfully friendship-driven movie.
It sounds lovely and not scary at all.
So, yeah, before we get into the spoiler part of it, maybe you'd like to talk about, the gory parts that upset you the most. And
yeah.
Exactly.
Before we get into like the spoiler section of it, I'll just give like a brief summary of the gory aspects. So, just like a little bit of a heads up and a warning, and I can give you guys the rating up front. So just in case it's too much for anybody, you can turn it off at any point.
Close your eyes, plug your ears.
But yeah, right now, I guess the only part we're spoiling are the gory parts of it. But we will get into like full-on spoilers after this, the whole storyline, everything. So this is just a little taste of what's to come and the things that someone not good with gore, this is my experience with it. And for people watching the YouTube video, I have a beautiful, a little like coffin letter board that I like to write like the main takeaway for me from the movie. And I've written the bowel on it. And there's a little house and a horse and a tree and a poo. So
All
is
relevant.
the message. It's the message of the movie.
Horses, trees, booze, and houses.
Debowling. There is many a debowel.
Many people lose their bowels in this movie.
Yeah. So I'll go through all of the gore and then I'll give you guys my rating after that. So yeah, obviously there's a ton of debowling. But the thing is with the debowling, you're not seeing the action of it happening. You just sort of see the post debowel. There's some animal gore. And again, you don't see it happening necessarily. It's just we see an elk pinned up in a tree and his intestines are hanging out. Then we also see a human pinned up into a tree with the gut ripped out.
Lots of guts.
There's lots of guts.
There's
there's some knee swelling. More dudes getting pinned up. You see some very, very old people. We see
old people are terrifying enough. You should just stop watching it for that. I know, it feels funny to put that. It's not
gore. It's not gore, but they are kind of like mummified humans.
There is an old woman that's just chewing chud like a cow.
Yeah. And there's some stabbing, and there's the worst part for me, which was thumb breaking. So
with the fingers.
I guess there is like there's a part at the beginning where you see like a guy getting hit in the head, but you don't really see what happened to his face. You just sort of see him fall to the ground, so you don't necessarily see gore, but that you kind of feel it. So there's that aspect. It's more of not visceral. I guess visceral. I don't know. It just, you feel it happening. You don't necessarily see it. That is the gist of the gore. It's not too bad. It's fairly tame in the sense where it's not like the stuff that I can't handle, which is the very close up gore when you see the act of something happening. That's the worst part for me. So if you're like me, you can totally watch this movie. You just have to watch out. There's going to be some intestines hanging out sometimes. So I gave it 4 out of 5 gory wieners, and 5 gory wieners being that, like, let's say there's 5 gore wieners in a room. If I give it 5 out of 5, all 5 of the gore wieners can watch the movie.
It's like watching Gremlins.
Yeah, it's like watching Gremlins. It can be a little spooky, but it's a fun time. It's not gonna freak anyone out, really. But 1 or 0 gory wieners out of 5. There's no gore wiener in the world that can handle that movie. So, at least at this point of the journey. So, I get 4 out of 5 gory wieners. I took a point off for the thumb breaking scene because it is a close up of a dude breaking his own thumb. So, there you go. That's that.
So essentially the overarching plot of the movie is that these 5 friends in the beginning go out for a boys' night out, and they have a jolly old time in the streets of London. And one of the friends particularly doesn't want the party to end and decides to pop into a liquor store and gets his buddy to come in with him. And when they do that, they unfortunately find that they're in the post-robbery, and they see this terrified clerk lady just cowering behind the desk, and quickly realize that there are 2 people in the store that are currently robbing it. And unfortunately, one friend freezes, and the other friend runs away and hides. And he essentially is just frozen in terror and watches his chum get beaten to death by these robbers. And he wants to help, but he can't because of the natural fear of, humans just being in an uncertain situation where their life could be threatened. And he just watches him die. And it hard cuts to them being out in the wilderness of Sweden, where they talked about earlier going on a trip with the 5 of them because they wanted to try something different, because they're trying to mature and be different than what they were when they were going to university together. And I think that's kind of part of the story of the movie is people trying to kind of mature into adulthood while still kind of being stuck in the past. And they try to honor their dead friend with this memorial on the mountains of Sweden, and quickly succumb to the elements of the wilderness, and it starts to piss rain, and they're out in the middle of nowhere on the top of a mountain, so they're just getting drenched with water, and they decide to take shelter in this forest. And their very confident leader friend decides to take charge and tell them we can totally get through this forest and we can get to where we need to go, this little logging community where we can find civilization and get dry and be happy. And so he says it'll only take a day, just walk through the woods, super simple, and nothing will go wrong. As every story of people going into the woods goes.
Starts that way. And I guess we should also introduce the characters briefly and full, what's the word?
We don't need a full character breakdown.
Full warning, but this is 100% spoiler territory from now on. So we are getting into the depths of the movie. But yeah, the character breakdowns, because I'll explain later, I read the book and the characters differ, so I'll explain a little bit of that later. But we do have most of the main characters carry over. So the main one, Luke, he's the one from the very beginning who unfortunately watched his friend get murdered. And then we have Hutch, who is the leader of the group, which was the one who kind of, he's leading everyone into, we will soon find, into the forest. And that's where some shit goes down. And then we have Phil and Dom, and they are kind of, they're also, they're supposed to be pretty close friends, or at least they were in the past, and they're
the characters that the writer cared about the least.
Exactly. They're like supporting characters. They're very, very flat characters in the movie, especially. We don't even learn that much about them. So, yeah. And Dom, he twists his knee before they even get into the woods. So between when they've been camping out in this, it's the Swedish wilderness, right? They're in Sweden. And they're in, it's like very barren, like there's beautiful mountains and stuff everywhere, but where they are, it's very clear. You can see where you're going.
No shelter whatsoever.
But there's no shelter. So it's pouring rain, and they're packing up camp, and then on the way into an area with trees, Dom twists his knee, and you can tell it's a pretty bad twist, and so he's struggling to walk, and that's kind of part of the reason why Hutch is like, shit, okay, we probably should try to take a shortcut, and the only way, the fastest way theoretically to their destination would be through this like very thick bunch of like woodsy forest.
Evil
Otherwise, they'd
Swedish
have to go all
woods.
the way around it. Yeah. They did a very good scouting job.
They enter these very spiny, evil-looking woods with dense trees, and they come across the elk. That is the first warning that something is amiss. And this elk is impaled into a tree about 10 feet off the ground, and it's essentially torn open from throat to groin, and all of its guts are spilled out. And of course they have the wonderful horror movie logic where it's like, it's probably just a bear. That's definitely what did it. There's nothing weird about this. Let's just keep going, because
that's exactly what happened.
That's how bears work. They just impale animals into trees and don't eat them and then tear them apart, because that's what animals always do, because they just hunt to scare the shit out of people.
They're also 12 feet tall, so,
And so, against their better judgment, they journey farther into the woods, and unfortunately, they soon realize that they don't really know where they're going, and nighttime is approaching, and it starts to pour down rain. And they find this very inviting cabin to go stay in, which it looks like something out of anyone's nightmares. This cabin looks less inviting than the cabin from the Evil Dead.
This is the part of the movie where I immediately thought of the Blair Witch Project, because they're starting to see symbols. I think they see it before
Nordic runes carved into the trees.
Into the trees, and they go into this super sketchy cabin that looks old as fuck, and it's just like, it's empty. It looks like it's been abandoned there for thousands of years or something.
Yeah, it's like stained black, and it just is all these holes in it. It's like nothing there works, and there's no electricity. It has like a wood fireplace, and that's about it. And they go upstairs. There's a staircase which they go up and discover a horrifying tree statue, which is headless and has both of its arms held up with these two scythes, I think, like two tools that they use for farming. Oh, okay. But it kind of looks like deer antlers, essentially, is what it's supposed to look like. And it's this like weird kind of Wicker Man style looking
it is tribute. Very Wicker Man.
Yeah, it looks very Wicker Man-y, except you see at the bottom of the feet, it looks like there's dried up old people feet. And so you kind of get the glimpse that there was a human corpse underneath all of that. And so they decide to just, ignore all of that, go to sleep after hearing horrible sounds in the woods, because they have no choice. It's pouring rain, and they hear these animal noises, which are terrifying, and they decide...
Maybe demon sounds.
Yeah, it sounds like a very unearthly sort of animalistic sounds, and so they decide to stay in the cabin. They all go to sleep, and they all have horrifying nightmares, but the one that is played out is Luke, who's the main character, and he sees this blinding light coming in from the window, which is odd because it's the middle of the night, and he opens the door to find the liquor store that his friend got murdered in, and it's kind of a combination of both forest and the store, which is a cool kind of combination. Yeah. And he sees his friend getting killed again by the robbers, but this time one of the robbers looks up, and he's got these really unearthly, glowing, glassy eyes, which is the first indication that something's amiss. And after that, the whole liquor store wall breaks down, and he gets pulled through the woods and wakes up suddenly outside of the cabin, and he's bleeding from his chest, and he has these 5 puncture wounds that look kind of like finger imprints, like something literally pulled him from the cabin out into the middle of the woods. And so, very confused, he decides to go back into the cabin to find out that his fearless leader had a nightmare and pissed himself, and then Dom, the guy who busted up his knee, is just screaming in the corner, calling out his wife's name. Yeah. And they have no idea where the other guy is until they decide to go upstairs, and they discover him butt naked, covered in like dirt and cuts, and he's praying to the horrifying Wicker Man statue. And that is definitely the beginning of where the communication breakdown, and you realize they're not really maybe as good of friends, because like many classic horror movies, if you just goddamn talked about what was happening and shared your emotions, you could avoid a lot of horrifying stuff.
Feels like that's always the hidden message in like all horror movies. It's like, dude, if you guys just talked a little bit better and you could communicate what the hell was going on and like stop second guessing yourself.
And stop trying to hold this false bravado that everything is fine.
Yeah, everyone is so prideful of how they look in front of other people. Especially like, and this is a good example of, it's like a group of dudes that just, they want to look like they're in control, and they're just, the pride is getting in the way of them sharing their emotions and the feelings and the shit they're going through. So they're all just trying to look like the tough guy and muscle through it, even though like one of them pissed their pants. The other person woke up absolutely like screaming in the corner, and the other guy is like suddenly just praying butt naked to this weird ass wicker statue thing. It's like,
yeah, and the main character has wounds in his chest that they just brush off as saying, "Oh, you did it to yourself." It's like, who the fuck would do that? You would have to be so mentally unhinged to somehow stab 5 wounds into your chest. Like, that's not something that you could realistically do to yourself if you were even close to normal. You don't even...
Exactly. So they get out of this cabin and they start on their merry way. It's like, well, we gotta get out of the woods. It'll just take us one more day. That's it. By nightfall, we should be out of the edge of the woods. And they're slowly making their way, and it's just getting dark. They cannot find... The leader is always kind of like... The woods are just so thick that they can't quite find the right way to go. And they're getting lost, and they're just... By the time it's nightfall, they haven't made it out of the woods, and so they just have to pitch up a camp. But I think this is the point when Luke, he kind of runs a little bit further and he sees into a clearing. Is it this point?
Yeah. He decides to go run up a hill to see if he has any chance of getting out anytime soon, and realizes that up the hill is just more super dense forest.
Yeah.
And there's just this wonderful camera shot of like a slow pushing of the camera and showing the dense forest, and it really holds on this shot for a long time. You're wondering exactly why, and then all of a sudden you just see these human-like fingers unravel from a tree and just pull away. And it's so unnerving because the hand blends in so perfectly with the tree. You really don't know it's there until the motion itself starts. And if you look hard enough, you can kind of see it beforehand, but you're still not sure because it just blends so well with the tree. But then once the movement happens, you're like, oh, holy shit. Okay, there's like this thing that makes horrible animal noises that has a human hand, and you just see this very large body mass kind of shuffle out of his vision, and you can realize that it has human hands, but it also must be like 12 feet tall. Must be
fucking massive.
Yeah, it's a big ass thing.
They do such a good job hiding it as well, because it's a huge ass creature. And you never really see it until near the end.
They do a very Jaws-like, wonderful hidden reveal of the creature, and it's like you could just put the Jaws music over top of it, and it would work perfectly. Just like this, it's just like land Jaws, essentially. This horrifying thing that they have no idea what it is, but it's clearly very easily able to kill them at any point. But it, for whatever reason, is deciding to just kind of stalk them and scare them. Which adds extra trauma.
And at this point, we should also say the tensions between everybody are getting to like an ultimate high, because there's all this tension from the beginning of the inciting incident where Luke basically watches his friend get murdered. Despite him wanting to save him, he froze in the moment and he couldn't move his body. And he finds out that basically, even though, with Hutch especially, Hutch told him it wasn't your fault, I don't blame you for anything, but he finds out that they actually do. They all blame him for his friend dying. All of their, like, this guy was friends with all of them. But he finds out that everyone basically blames him for their friend's death. And so there's a lot of tension it just keeps getting higher and higher, and which is also a really good part of the movie because it just really plays into that tension of it's getting darker and everyone is at each other's throats, and it's like there's this thing following them, like what the heck is going to happen? And it starts getting dark and they have to pitch up camp in the middle of the woods at night. And
I think they do like a really good job of kind of showing how humans are good at avoiding the main problem of their situation, where all they're talking about is how this poor Luke guy was responsible for their friend's death, even though in the very immediate situation, they're all lost in the woods because of all of them, and they definitely know there is an animal stalking them. They don't know what it is, and it is clearly trying to hunt them, and they're not willing to talk about that at all. Instead, they decide to go on a giant rant about how Luke is a son of a bitch for not saving his friend and being a superhero that could just beat the shit out of two burglars with weapons on his own. And it just shows how people love to talk about anything but the actual problem of the moment.
Yep, exactly.
And each of them are good at that. Yeah.
And at this point, this is when more shit starts to go down. After they've, I don't think I'm missing anything in between, but yeah, they've set up camp, and then they wake up to screaming, basically, in the middle of the night, and they find out, after they've searched a little bit, that Hutch is gone. They can't find Hutch. They see
his whole tent flies into the air.
It's all, his tent is completely fucked, and I think there's a big blood trail leading somewhere.
They hear him screaming, and it's still the middle of the night, so they're afraid to go anywhere.
They can't really do anything, and it's not until in the morning where they go looking for him. It's like, okay, well, Hutch went this way. Let's see if we could find anything. And then we see what happened to Hutch.
And he shared the elk's fate.
Yeah, he's pinned up very high up into a tree, and his guts are spilled open from chest to crotch.
yeah, that's about it.
Yeah.
A lot of disemboweling.
He's the only one with a compass, because he was their leader, so they actually have to take him down and to get the compass in order to get out of the woods. So that's what they do. And we get to see close-up of the guts in all its glory as they're looking for the compass.
Get it off his belt, and it's obviously very disturbing for them.
Continually getting more and more annoyed with Dom, because he is the most whiny character in this movie. He's the one with the twisted knee, and he, instead of continuing to walk while it's light out, decides to get a bunch of sticks and cover up Hutch, but wastes a lot of time, a lot of valuable daylight time to do that. It's it's understandable that you would want to do that, but this is kind of a life or death situation right now. Clearly people are dying. And
this thing very specifically only attacks at night. That's when it decides to mess with them.
Yeah. So, they do that. They waste some time, and then they continue on, hoping to get out of the woods. But they
very not so.
Yeah, don't really get out of the woods yet. Between this point and the next major incident, it's just more and more fighting, and they're still kind of at each other's throats and getting nervous. And then nightfall starts. It starts to get a little bit darker, and then suddenly the least rounded out character out of all of them gets swiped out. Phil. I have nothing to say about Phil. He's just the one that was he was praying to that thing.
He has a little bit about how he hears the thing inside of his mind, and essentially is continuing to talk to him.
So they are starting to kind of share what they were dreaming about.
Phil loses it. He's just breaks down emotionally at this point, mentally, and he's like, I can't keep doing this. I have to tell you that I hear voices of a horrifying being in my mind. And it says it's going to kill me.
Exactly. It's they're sharing these things while it's too late. It's they should have probably just, after they got to the cabin, just walked out to try to just leave, It's I
Well,
don't
they
know if we're
even
going to
suggest that, but the one guy is so arrogant that he believes he can lead them through the forest, and it doesn't matter if there's a weird animal that can tear an elk from throat to crotch that hangs things in trees.
Yeah. So Phil gets taken, and then they're both scared shitless, so they start running. And this part made me laugh so much because we hear so much from Dom about, I was like, I would have fucking fought for our friend, and like, you know, still
He's
yelling
so
at him
confident.
about this incident. It's like, if I was you, like, just I would have beat the shit out of those guys. And then we cut to Dom in the moment when they could hear this creature in the background, and he is crying, like shuddering underneath this, behind this like area of a tree. He's just,
you just see like his eyes just poking out through like a tree root, and he's like, "Ooh!" He looks so terrified.
Just like, exactly. This is what you would do in that situation, 100%. So they basically both make a run for it eventually, as this thing is running after them.
You still don't see it yet.
To this. Don't see it yet. You just kind of, you can hear it mostly. Yeah. And then they get to this area where they see all these lights, like candle lights that are along this pathway. So like, what the fuck is this? There must be people out here. So they just follow this pathway, and they finally get into what looks like a cabin, and they rush inside and shut the door. And then before they know it, someone has hit them both over the head, and they are knocked unconscious.
Yes, the situation gets even worse.
It does, if you could believe it.
They end up being captured by Swedish hillbillies who've tied
Nazis.
them up. Yeah, Nazi Swedish hillbilly. At least one of them's a Nazi. We confirmed at least one of them is a Nazi. And they tie them up in this horrible little basement dungeon. And it's when the old lady horror comes into play, and this old woman, Chewin' Chud, decides to go and inspect both of them, and she just sees that Luke has his markings on his chest, and that means something to her, and she pulls down her shirt and reveals that she also has similar markings to him, and she also has a giant swastika on her chest. And you're like,
the dots. She connected the dots of the marking in like a swastika shape. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah. It's like you wonder, because they don't really spell out a lot about the villagers. They're not like, you don't have like one of the villagers explain like, oh, all these people have lived here for 200 years and this is blah blah blah. And they do a really good job.
It feels like two different movies. I'm glad that they kept it very vague with the villagers, but they do tie it pretty well, like tie the two worlds together pretty well. It's just watching the ritual was not expecting it to take this twist at all, but they handle it pretty well. Yeah,
it's nice that there's a change of environment, because up to this point, 2/3 of the movie have been them running in the woods, being scared in the woods. So it's nice that they
well done.
They figure out a way to kind of change up the environment. Even though they're still stuck in the woods, they found this horrible Swedish hillbilly village. And they all pray to the thing that's been chasing them the whole movie. And they have these like horrifying statues with like deer skulls on them. And they're pretty much all they do all day is just create totems for this creature that has corralled them into this town. And you find out that the one guy, Luke, has been chosen by the creature, while other Dom with the busted knee, unfortunately, has not. And so he is going to be given for sacrifice to this thing in the woods. And they take him away and prepare him, and you just hear these horrifying screams, and you don't really know what they do to him, but he comes back pretty beaten up, and who knows what they did to him, but he's not looking so funky fresh. And that's when he decides finally it's about time to share his emotions with Luke, as he knows he's pretty much about to die. And he reveals to Luke that the nightmare he had in the cabin foresaw all of this happening, and if he had just told them, they probably would have at least considered turning around, because he reveals that, oh yeah, I had a nightmare where we went through the woods, we got captured by a creature, and then my wife kills me. I see my wife in the woods, and she kills me, even though that's impossible. And you just wonder why he didn't decide to share that earlier. And if he did, they could have avoided probably all of them dying, because at that point you would have been like, well, that's insane. Why would you dream that? And compounded with everyone else's dreams, you would have gotten the hell out of there. You wouldn't have stayed around. But it's too late for that, and so poor Dom, he gets hoisted up on a Swedish cross that looks like a Y, and they essentially summon the creature, and you see all this rustling in the woods, and it's definitely like a big presence, like a big physical body, but then all of a sudden, a woman just pops out of the woods after all of that rustling, and it's a human woman, and you find out that it's actually Dom's wife, and his dream is coming true, and she's talking to him, and she starts to touch his face, but then her eyes start to glow, and then it hard cuts to a close-up of what that thing looks like, and it's this horrifying, like, leather torso with like eyes sunken into a black void, and they're just like glowing yellow eyes, and it has horrifying human hands that are just touching his face all over it, and it just hoists him up by his head and just plunks him into a tree branch and impales him on it, and that's the end of Dom. He just gets stabbed into a tree and by his wife. Dead. And that's all, folks.
You see the creepy hands like grasp like his face and stuff, and it's like
it's like creepy gentle caress, but at the same time, it's very
creepy. It's like one of those scenes, that whole scene thing. I just expect to see more gore, because that's the thing. It was like I like creepy things. I like watching spooky, weird shit, but I always am so afraid to watch stuff like that, because it's like I'm just expecting it to like hard cut, like the guts being like ranked out or something. But you don't see any of that. It's just more creepy and weird, gentle caressing.
They do a really good restraint of gore in this movie. They definitely could have gone a lot worse or a lot gorier.
Yeah, they totally could have.
The lack of it is almost creepier, because it seems like it's doing it for a purpose. You have no idea what that purpose is, but it has a reason for what it's doing. And you clearly understand that this thing could have killed them at any time, but it very specifically chose not to, and actually funneled them towards the village throughout the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And then, that's when your favorite part comes up.
All throughout this, Luke is watching through the shitty siding of the wall. Like, they built these cabins with what looks like mud or clay in between, like, these wood logs. So he just pokes out a part of the clay so he can like look through with his eye, and he's watching all of this. So throughout this, he's trying to escape, and you see him like twisting. He's got rope around his hands, and he keeps twisting it, and he's like making the skin on his wrists all raw, and it's nasty. And then you see him like try to get his hand out, and then that's when he has to break his thumbs in order to get out of the restraints, and it's I can't watch it. So I hate watching that shit. So he breaks his thumb, so he gets out of the restraints, and he basically tries to escape this weird fucking village. And this part is a little bit muddy for me because it is combining with the book a little bit, so I'll let you explain what happens here.
So essentially he, after he breaks his thumb, he's able to get out of the restraints, and he finds this side room with a bunch of stuff from all of the people that this monster has kept in the village, and you realize that it's been going on for hundreds of years, because the stuff in the storage room ranges very drastically time-wise. And so he finds a giant stockpile of rifles, and they happen to be World War II German rifles, and that's when you realize, oh, that lady is a Nazi, and at some point there were a bunch of Nazis that came into the woods, and this thing murdered the shit out of them and kept this one woman as its captor, essentially. And so he decides to take his gun and bust out and try to escape. He jams his gun, eventually gets it working, shoots a dude who looks like a skinny version of Sloth from the Goonies, and then he goes upstairs into the attic where he finds this horrifying church, essentially, where there's these pews of people that look like that tree thing that they find in the original cabin, and they're kind of in varying stages of growth, and you realize that, oh, those things are made out of people, and essentially this creature will keep you alive, will make you immortal. That's the big plus.
Immortal in quotations.
Yeah, real big quotations on immortal, because let me tell you, their version of immortality is not great. And
fate worse than death.
Yeah, so you realize that, yes, this thing, if you pray to it, it will keep you alive, but at a certain point in your lifespan, you will decide to go up into this attic and essentially let nature take you over and consume your body. And so they're still alive, but they can't move. They're covered in bark. And he just sees this one kind of like horrifying, emaciated skeleton and just starts screaming. And it's at that point where he makes the very, very practical choice to burn that fucker to the ground. And he's just like, without saying anything, he just looks at the screaming skeleton tree monster. He's like, you're burning, and you're burning, and you're burning. And he's just like, yeah, I'm going to burn this shit to the ground.
I loved that moment, too, because it's just like, hell yeah, that's exactly what I would do.
Yeah, and it's like, it's so quiet up to that point. He's alone, so he's not saying anything. He's just looking around at this horrifying, creepy room filled with tree corpses, and just without saying anything, just burns everything. He's like, yep, I've seen enough. Nothing needs to be said. I'm going to light everything on fire. And so this definitely upsets the creature that we're still not exactly sure what it is. We know that it's big. It kind of has a weird human torso with glowing eyeballs and human hands. And so he comes downstairs, and there's this really great part where it you can see its hands kind of grab around the side of the door, and it lowers its body and peeks in, and you just see its horrible face and all of its creepy glory. And you're just like, what the fuck is that?
You can't figure out what the heck it is, because it's just constantly, you're seeing different sides of it. And
it's like, how does it have a human-like body? But it's really big.
Yeah, because he's like, does he shoot someone, or is he mostly just he's setting shit on fire at this point?
Yeah, and that's
sets,
when
the whole building's on fire, really.
And the creature gets pissed off and grabs one of the cultists.
Yeah, that's right.
And just decides to murder it because it's pissed.
Yeah, and there's a really great scene too after Luke is like trying to escape, and we look back at the burning building, which leads to a really stupid point, but. There's a really great shot where you just see the shadow of the creature, and you can see that it's basically like this giant elk-like thing with like this weird upper torso where its head should be, and then there's like human arms and hands that kind of look a little bit like antlers at times, but it like can reach that. It's so fucking weird.
Yeah, and even when you look at it fully, you still don't really understand what it is. It's like
hard to understand it, but yeah, like after Luke has escaped all of this and everything is on fire, he has this gun and he just decides to shoot the creature
with one bullet. It's this massive, like 16-foot tall elk, ancient monster.
Man. Just run away. You don't need to try to kill it. You're not going to be able to kill it. Like, just fucking run.
What is one bullet? He's just a normal dude. He's not like a sniper that can like pinpoint shoot it in the head. And you don't even know if shooting it in the head would kill it because it's so weird looking that what the hell?
What is its head? Where is its head? I don't know. What organs are in what? Yeah, it doesn't make sense. But I guess like that's the one part of the movie where it was like, okay, they needed him to get the attention back. Like we needed to have more of a chase near the end. Otherwise, it would have just been a little bit of a fizzle out, but
left.
A little like anticlimactic. It's like, I just left.
Yeah, you want something a little more exciting at the end of your movie than I saw this horrible thing and decided rationally to leave. That was the end of it.
I mean, they could have probably. I don't know. It's whatever. He shoots it. He's not in his right mind. He shoots it, and then the creature runs after him and
naturally
is like chasing him through this forest. Yeah, it does. The shot does nothing to it, but this creature is coming after Luke at this point, and Luke is running for his life through the forest. And every time the creature catches up to him, all it does is it just pushes him down with his nasty, huge hand to get him to pray to him. So it's not like killing him. It's like, pray to me. It's like forcing him to pray. And I think it's because he has that marking. It's like he's chosen to be one of its worshipers. And so it's just trying to force him to pray to this thing. And that's when we get this amazing shot of the creature where you see it in all of its weird ass glory, and it raises up on its like haunches, and its like torso human thing raises up into like a praising hand thing with like a human torso / the crotch is its face and these human hands coming up, and
like another set of hands come out of it. It's like has another set of human hands that you haven't even seen before, and there's like another section to its torso that looks like
But they do a really good job because it's like it's clearly someone had to think through and design this so that it could anatomically move into this weird thing, and they made it look like it did that.
Yeah, it looks like it should move that way, even though you have no idea.
When you see it's like what I imagine it would be like to see an alien or something.
Yeah.
It's like, it makes sense to me, but it is clearly working. Like, it's moving, it's alive,
its body does this for a purpose. There is a mechanical reason why it looks and acts like this, even though you have no earthly idea what the hell it's doing or why it's doing it. Or
exactly.
You just know that it needs worshipers and it needs people to pray to it, and clearly it feeds off of these people that it chooses. And since he's burned down the entire village, this thing is essentially out of choices and really needs him because he's the only one left that it can feed off of, theoretically. And he just decides, nah, I'm not going to do this. And he takes his old-timey hatchet that he got off of one of the Swedish hillbillies and hacks it in the face in its torso area, and it kind of pisses it off. It doesn't kill it or anything, and
it stuns it kind of.
It stuns it enough that he starts running again, and he finally, at the end of the movie, sees the light at the end of the tunnel, and you're so relieved when you get to the edge of the woods and finally see that he's going to leave, and you realize that the creature can't leave the woods. That is like the barrier that it can't cross. And it is just sitting there looking at him and essentially probably very pissed off that he's gone. And Luke just finally lets out all of his bottled up emotions from all of his friends dying and letting his past friend die. And he finally built up the courage to stand up for himself. And he starts screaming at the monster over and over again, just releasing all of the pent up emotions that he's had for, over a year. And he realizes how lucky he is that he's alive, and all of his friends are dead, and he is the only person that can tell people what the hell happened. And you don't get to see any of that. It's just that is the end of the movie. He has conquered his emotional trauma, essentially, and this horrifying elk Nordic humanoid monster was the representation of kind of all the fears that they were running from. I think, at least, is like this thing represented all of their bottle up emotions, and over the course of it forces him to reveal all of that, and essentially is like the worst therapist you could possibly have. It's this horrifying elk human monster that forces him to essentially deal with his trauma, and he's probably a better person for it.
Yeah, because throughout the whole movie, he's not able to stand up for himself. He can't get his body to kind of like follow through with what he really wants, and it's that's sort of the theme of the movie. It's like he's not standing up for himself, and he's sort of letting his fear get in the way of his life, basically. And at the end of the movie, he finally was like, fuck this. I'm not going to live a fate worse than death. I'm going to at least try to escape and live the rest of my life without having to pray to this creature in the middle of the woods. So he does it, and he finally is able to stand up for himself, and then he escapes. So it's just kind of a nice like little bow on a movie. Yeah.
Gives you a kind of happy ending.
As far as a horror movie goes, like, it's pretty good.
There's
a lot of movies that do not end that way, so it's nice.
Yeah. At least there's a glimmer of hope at the end that, like, well, at least he lived.
Yeah, it's not as certain movies where everything is very irrationally perfect at the end. It's like, everyone lived happily ever after. It's like, no, most of the people in this movie died, but at least one person got to escape and live another day. So
right, yeah. And that's essentially the plot of The Ritual.
That's it. Yeah, and all of its beautiful woodsy glory. And before we get into the book, we could get into, or should we do the book first and then get into some of the making of?
Yeah, let's just go with the book first and
because it's kind of nice to have a direct comparison between the two, and then we can get into some of the making of stuff to end it off. It's kind of interesting because reading the book was the first half of it was really, really well done. Like, there were parts where I was listening to it and I didn't want to stop listening to I listened to the audiobook and I didn't want to stop listening to it. So I'd like go to bed and have it playing. But then as soon as I would turn off the lights, the most terrifying parts would always happen. And I would like wake up with like a vision of what the book was describing. But then when I got into the second half of the book, it was not nearly as good as the ending of the movie. It was kind of became a little bit more muddled, but yeah. So the book, first off, the inciting incident doesn't happen in the book. In the part where we see Luke basically watch his friend get murdered, that doesn't happen at all in the book. And the way that they describe sort of, because they have similar tensions in the movie and the book, but I think the movie did a really good job at setting that up for a film, because in the book, obviously, you're reading sort of like a character's internal dialogue so you can understand the thought processes a little bit better. And with the movie, it was very upfront with what their tensions were going to be. It's like you can understand why people would be upset at Luke, even though it doesn't rationally make sense. It's like if that happened in someone's life, you could understand why they would hold a little bit of resentment towards the one person that was able to save like everybody's friend. But anyways, in the book, everybody has more the type of tension that you get in a friend group when they've started to grow apart. So everybody were best friends in college, and then as they got older, everybody except for Luke, they got married and they've settled down, they've got kids, and Luke has more just kind of been living a more free-spirited life. And in his mind, he's more trying to find his way. He doesn't feel like he's made it as much as the other guys, but Hutch and Phil and Dom, they've sort of see Luke as this free-spirited person, and they hold resentment towards him because he's not tied down and he isn't going through all these issues that that they are in their own relationships.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of the things that the tensions rely upon a little bit more. And yeah, the next thing I noticed that was different was how the book starts. And the book actually starts like right in the thick of it. Like they are already on this camping trip, and the first scene is the scene with the elk pinned up in a tree in the book. That's where it starts out. And I thought that was interesting because it does actually set the mood really well. And then a lot
something's bad happening.
Yeah. And then a lot of the history you find out through more of like internal dialogue and stuff like that. So yeah, it was actually kind of a good way for it to set it up. And yeah, I'll just get into the characters as described in the book because they actually they have a little bit more backstory in the book, which is kind of nice because I think the movie did a decent job at describing the characters, but obviously they didn't have enough time to really get like super into each person's backstory. So in the book, Luke, he's in his late 30s. He's a bachelor. He's working to survive, but he's not tied down, seen as carefree and aimless by his friends. Hutch, he is the glue that holds the crew together. He's the one that planned the trip, and he is the navigator. He is calm, a natural leader, and someone that everyone respects and looks up to for advice. Dom, the guy that twisted his knee, which he also does in the book, he's overweight, married too young, and he's going through a divorce, which we find out later in the book because he's hiding sort of all of his issues from Luke. So Luke and Dom and Phil are all a little bit closer than Luke. Luke kind of lives alone in London, and the rest of them kind of have moved on, and they have sort of like kind of kept in touch. It's like how you had friends like from back in high school or something, and you kind of like touch in every now and then. I think that's kind of what their relationship is now.
Well, especially if he's like kind of the bachelor version of them, then, you know, it's like they don't feel as close to him.
There's not much to relate to anymore. And then there's Phil, I was actually kind of surprised at how much they talked about Phil in the book because he's such a flat character in the movie. But he's kind of a different character in the book a little bit. He's very overweight in the book, but he like let himself go. He let himself go a lot, and from what I understand, when he was in college, he was a little bit more of a bachelor. He was more of a ladies' man, and now in the book it says like he let himself go to the point where he now has like a 43-inch waist or something.
Yeah, he's just like I'm married and I hate my life. I'm going to just eat and drink myself silly. Yeah,
and he also has some marital issues for himself, which he doesn't disclose until later. But yeah, his wife is leaving him and taking the kids from him due to his company going under, causing him to go bankrupt, which, yeah, we find out that his wife was only with him because he had money. And he's pretending to be happily married and rich to keep up the act in front of Luke. And Hutch kind of does disclose some of these things to Luke after Luke kind of lashes out on some of them, which we find out that Luke has some anger management issues a little bit in the book. And Hutch tells him to go easy on them because they are actually going through some shit that they didn't want to disclose because this trip was more as like a bonding thing and for Phil and Dom to kind of escape their lives and just have some time to relax.
Still sucks they just shit on Luke so much. It's like, hey, let's bond by shitting on this guy and don't talk about their personal problems, but they'll talk about yours. It's like, oh, that's nice hypocritical.
Dicks in the book. They were such dicks. Like especially Phil and Dom, they really ganged up on Luke a lot, and then Luke, I think, played into it too much. So then they just wouldn't stop, and it was just giving them more and more resentment towards Luke, and I felt so bad for Luke throughout the book. but he also was kind of like getting super fired up by it, when there's certain people that have anger issues, you can tell, where it's like just anything can just make it bubble up.
Yeah,
and
they're
that's
so
kind
volatile.
That's what was happening in the book. And I wrote that next, is basically the main tension of the book comes from Luke feeling left out, and the crew was very close, but after growing distant, Dom and Phil grow resentful towards Luke for being free from the many issues that weigh and tie them down. Thus, they leave him out from many conversations and scoff at most of the things he says, causing Luke to lash out. So that's where most of the tension comes from, which I think it was done really well in the book, but like I said before, I understand why the movie didn't do that, because it's sort of like, how do you portray that properly without it being kind of boring, and it takes away from the point of the story at a certain point when you're spending too much time on that. So I think the movie did a good job balancing like the horror aspect and the relational tension. And then we get to the forest cabin, which happened to be the part where I was like, oh, I'm just going to keep listening to this. It's good. While I turn the lights off and I go to bed. And they get to the cabin and the upstairs room. It isn't quite the same. So the upstairs room with the wicker man thing in it, it's actually, in the book, it's a stuffed goat with human arms that are sewn onto it, raised towards the ceiling, and it's like propped up inside this wooden coffin box thing, and it's surrounded by old human remains. And it's like the feeling that they get when they go and look at it, they kept thinking that it was something looking at them, because the eyes always just seem to be looking at them, even though it's like a dead stuffed goat.
Goat eyes are the creepiest too, because they have those horrible rectangle pupils where they're not like a normal person pupils. They got like those crazy slits for
That's
pupils.
Right, they're like side.
Yeah, goat eyeballs are freaky already, let alone with human arms attached to it on top of a pile of corpses.
Yeah. So it was a very creepy thing to listen to while I was trying to sleep.
Drifting off to sleep.
And then I had dreams about creepy goats. So and I think everything in the book at this point remains fairly similar, except when everyone wakes up, Luke does not have any markings on him. They all have fucked up dreams, but no one has any sort of markings like they showed in the movie. And everything goes fairly similarly. So the first person to get taken is Hutch, and then it's Phil, and then this is where it differs, is basically there's a point where basically Luke took over for Hutch, and he's got the compass, and he's trying to take them like southwest, I think. But they're having such a hard time keeping the direction going the right direction, because they basically have to go around all of the shrubbery and the trees. It's like you can only go so many ways. So at one point, Luke climbs up this tree just hoping he can see something, and that's when Phil gets taken, when he's up in the tree. And so he rushes down to go and see what's happening, and he falls part of the way down the tree. He hits his head on a rock when he lands on the ground, and he's got this huge gash in his head now, and he's doesn't like, it hurts, but it doesn't really faze him, and he's kind of like looking around like, what the hell is going on? Phil's gone. He goes into the tent and he sees Dom, and Dom's knee is so fucked up that he can't even move. Like, he's got it propped up and it's so swollen that he basically can't go on. He's like, I basically need to just stay here for a week if I have any chance of my knee healing. But at that point, he knows he's going to die if he stays there. So Dom is like, okay, you're going to have to go on without me. And it's kind of a sad, like a bittersweet moment, because finally, like for the longest time, Dom was just so resentful towards Luke, and he finally opens up at this point where he's telling him all the issues that he's having with his family, and he's sorry that he was being such an asshole towards Luke. And so they have kind of like this bonding moment, and
oh no, you're gonna die.
Luke, yeah, and then Dom tries to like wrap Luke's head a little bit with whatever they have left, and then basically Luke has to abandon Dom in the woods to go on his own way, and he's struggling so much more in the book because of this gash in his head. And so he's climbing through the woods, and eventually he's climbing on like all fours because he's so fucked. Like he can't even see because his vision is going. Like his skull is cracked. Like it's not a good time.
Not doing so well.
Right before he passes out, he sees these feet approaching him, and he basically passes out around people. He thinks he's like reached people that have basically found him and saved him.
Yeah.
And then he wakes up, and he's in... Yeah. He wakes up in the same box coffin that they saw in that shitty cabin. The goat cabin. And he's so confused as to what the hell is happening, but he's just so relieved that he thinks he's safe, you know? So he just keeps passing out, and he's sleeping, and he's trying to like regain consciousness. And he keeps waking up to seeing like these weird people surrounding him. At one point he wakes up, and there's like these villagers, which we later find out they're villagers, and they have this weird ass like white paint all over their faces, and some of them have like black shit like on their eyes or like on their mouth. One person is wearing a goat head, another one is wearing a bunny head, like a giant thing. I don't know. It's really
definitely would have fit a normal
weird
bunny on your head. That would like just be like sitting on the top.
Really, I don't know. So anyways, just weird ass people. And this is kind of the part where the book just starts to drag. It just drags on, and you kind of learn things about these characters. I won't go too far into it because I just don't think it really benefits the story very much.
Yeah,
but,
like who cares about the cultists at that point, you know?
Yeah, the movie did a much better job at really just kind of glossing over it. But basically, Luke, you find out later that they're keeping Luke alive because they need him to sacrifice him to like what they call the god of the forest. And when they pray to this god, it basically gives them eternal life, and it takes away their pain. And this one guy refers to it as the devil, and he's basically like a Satanist. So he thinks it's super cool, and he's just like this loser that like, he's like this death metal Nazi loser dude from Sweden, and he's just like, hell yeah, it's so freaking cool. Like, it's basically like it's the devil, and it will keep you alive. It's, I don't know. It's so the guy that did the voice acting for the book did a really good voice. But yeah, so he finds out later they're just keeping him alive so that they can sacrifice him, and they haven't been able to have a sacrifice for super long time because no one comes in these woods anymore. So basically, this is where it gets so freaking weird. So there's this old lady, and they describe her in the book as this little, she's so old, like it doesn't seem like it's possible for her to be this old. And whenever she walks around, she makes the loudest sounds. And because he has this huge gash in his head, he's so fucking loud. Like, can you stop walking? Like, you're wearing these, like tin shoes or something. Like, it's so loud. And you find out later that she's actually a descendant of the creature, and she has hooves. She's hooves for feet, and she's basically the one that's been in this village for the longest time. And a lot of these other weird ass villagers with the face paint, they're not welcome there. They just kind of showed up and then figured out that if they pray to this thing, that they'll live forever. And
weird thing to
this
do.
old lady, she basically wants Luke to kill these visitors because they're kind of taking advantage of the situation. Yeah. So they went to basically sacrifice him, but the old lady refused to call the creature, and she's the only one that can call the creature. So they bring him back inside and lock him up in the room that they've been keeping him in, and he wakes up in the middle of the night to this old lady basically like untying him and giving him a knife. And he's like, what the fuck? Okay, like, I was like, he's like, am I gonna escape or what's going on? And so he sneaks downstairs and he just like, he can see the old lady out of the corner of his eye, like looking at him and kind of looking at the other people that are kind of intruders in her house. And he's like, okay, I guess, does she want me to kill these people? And so he starts, I think he grabs like a gun and starts shooting them. Yeah. And after he's done shooting them, he's not sure like what the point of this was. But later, that's when she, after he's killed all of the like extra visitors, she finally calls the creature and is starting to like sing. And that's what calls the creature. So he just shoots her and he's like, okay, you were using me. Fuck this shit. I'm out of here. He goes up. And one of the dudes, it's like this part of the book is all over the place. So I'm sorry if it's not very like organized. But he finds out at one point that one of the visitors that came a little bit later on, he had a truck that he drove there. So he has keys, but they're like up in this attic area. So he runs up there after he's killed everybody. And that's where all the like weird old people are. So he has this gun and he like, instead of lighting everything on fire, like in the movie, he shoots every single one of them separately. It's so unnecessary.
I can see why they chose to do the fire instead.
Yeah, shoots every single one of them separately, and then he gets the keys. I'm sure I'm missing some steps, but it's fine. His part doesn't. Yeah, it's fine. So he grabs the keys and he gets into the truck, and there's basically like this weird chase scene with like the creature and him in the truck, and it's just
old-fashioned car chase.
It's like, it's basically like an old-fashioned car chase. And you kind of get more descriptions of the creature, but it's still fairly vague. You kind of see how fucked up it is, but you don't ever really see the whole. He never really sees the whole thing. He just sort of sees it in passing, or if it's attacking him. Like there's one point where its head gets stuck in the front of the vehicle, like because its antlers go through the windshield, and it can't get its head back out, and that's when he runs out and escapes. And then that's basically the end of the book. So he escapes, but it's through like this weird car chase scene.
Like the Dukes of Hazzard driving through the woods.
Yeah, and I will say the best part of the book is the woods in the beginning. It's beautifully described, and it must have been the main inspiration for the movie because it was truly captivating and terrifying, horror-wise and relational-wise. The tension was built in a much more real way than the movie, and it just kind of it gets under your skin because it's very realistic arguments, and you could sort of, you can hear the internal thought process of the characters, which is nice. The bad part is obviously the second half of the book where it loses the narrative and the theme. The movie did a much better job tying in a stronger theme in place of what the book attempted to do. In the movie, I would say it was, like we were saying before, it's stand up for what you believe in. Being a bystander can be sort of a death all on its own. You're not living your life. You're just kind of passive. And then in the book, they have sort of contradicting ideas. It's like they're trying to have that theme. But what I got from it is they're like, fight for the life you want. Don't take this, but also don't take the small pleasures for granted. And then they're also like, choose to live the life you live. At the same time, they're like, but don't live the life that you don't want to live. So it's kind of like, which one though? Because they're kind of different. It's like love the life you live or choose the life you want. It's kind of like they go back and forth between those two.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I don't know, it gets a little bit muddy in the second half, but yeah, overall, I think the movie did a better job at maintaining the theme and the overall feeling of horror throughout the movie was good. But the first half of the book was really, really well done. So I would recommend the book, but just with the understanding that the second half might not be as good as the first half.
yeah, drags on.
It drags, yeah. So hopefully that description of the book didn't drag on too long, but we could get into some more of like the nerdy stuff if you want, unless you had questions about the book.
Yeah. Let's dive into the creature itself, the horrifying deer elk humanoid thing, and so it's based off of Nordic mythology, and it's a woman in the movie does name it, sort of. It calls it a Jotun, and that's pretty much the only description you get. It says, yeah, it's a Jotun, and it's a bastard child of Loki. And Loki being the god
in the
of...
book. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, yeah, Loki's the god of mischief in Nordic mythology. He's not just a Marvel character. He is actually... they existed before Marvel, and he was the trickster god, essentially. And so, at some point, I guess he went gallivanting around like Zeus did, where, you know, gods love to just turn into animals and bang things. That's the way of the gods. And so, Loki... I don't know what combination of stuff you have sex with to make that thing, but had sex with something and created the Jotun, which is very generically also referred to as a troll, which is shocking because the idea of a troll for me is like a kind of a fat, round thing that lives under a bridge. Yeah, a gremlin sort of thing. But this thing is the worst version of a troll, if this is what trolls are. Holy crap. And it's essentially is just this creature that is comes from the land of Jotunheim. And in mythology... Yeah, very Swedish. Jotunheim. There's some umlauts in there. I'm sure I'm pronouncing all of this very wrong as well. But it kind of hints at to why, through the mythology, shows you why it can't leave the forest, because in kind of Nordic mythology, these Jotuns were separated from the human world by either mountains or forests. And in this case, it's both. And so it can't come into the human world, which is why in the movie it can't leave the forest. Like, that's its domain, and it can't wander beyond that. And then also its obsession with stabbing and impaling people into trees may be kind of loosely based off the idea that in Nordic mythology, apparently Odin impaled himself on his own spear in front of the world tree, the Yggdrasil. And so that may be the reason why the creature does it as well. Like, it's somehow linked to gaining knowledge or a sacrifice, a ritual, if you will, for the gods. And it's kind of interesting because in the movie they have those Nordic runes, which they actually are based off of real Nordic runes, and one of them specifically looks kind of like a Y with an extra point in the middle, and that is actually the Nordic rune for elk, which is very telling of the overall creature's image. And even when they hoist Dom to be sacrificed in the movie, he's put onto an elk symbol. It looks kind of like a cross, but it's actually supposed to be the symbol for elk. and that's when he gets face hugged. And he gets touched in a bad way. And so that's essentially the mythology that I could find on the creature, but the actual construction of it is interesting because the actual movie was bought by Andy Serkis, the guy behind Gollum and the Ape movies, and so very many other motion capture acting. And so he has a studio called Imaginarium, and so they bought the rights to the movie, and they were able to use their very extensive mocap studio to create all the previs for it, and they got to just kind of set up how it would work. I would have loved to have seen a video of exactly what that would have looked like with people, because I have no idea how you would create the previs for something like that, because it's half deer, half human creature. I have no idea how people could do that, but they were able to kind of create a motion that they wanted, and they kind of based it off of both a horse and a dog for the basic motion of the creature. And they also use concept from a moose for when it's charging at Luke at the end of the movie. They specifically used a video reference of a moose charging through snow, which becomes very apparent when you see this thing move, because it has really good mass to it. It doesn't just turn on a dime and then run at full speed. Like, you can feel that this thing has a bulk to it, and it doesn't just start going.
Which I will say is oddly hard to animate, to get really heavy weight into something, because it's very, as I feel like as animators, sometimes we do the poses and we expect it to work, and then I guess this is animation terms, but we would spline it, go from like blocking into like fully animated, and it's got no weight to it. It's because it can be such a subtle thing sometimes. So yeah, how realistic it looks for being such a weird, otherworldly creature is very impressive.
Yeah, they did.
And from 2016, right? That's when it was.
Yeah, it's an older movie, and it's mainly CG. There's only 2 shots in the movie where it's actually a practical effect, and which is great, because I thought that there was way more use of practical effects in the movie. So the CG creature is very well integrated into the movie. And they essentially built a life-size version of the human part of it for when it's close up and interacting with the characters. Like when it's sacrificing Dom, that's a practical effect. And they essentially just put this giant-ass leathery head thing with glowing eyeballs on a big metal boom, and they could lift it up and down, and there was a person inside of it on the crane itself that was the human hands. So that's why the hands are so good, is because they actually got a real person to do all the
I would love to do that part.
I want to be the person that touches your face.
I want to be the creepy hands for the creature.
What a weird thing to have to act out. It's like, okay, so this guy's going to be inside of it. Yeah, and he's just going to touch the shit out of your face. It's fine, don't worry about it. Like, it'd be so weird to be in that moment and just be the guy that's like, okay,
I know. You imagine being the actor who had their face touched, who just like, oh, they're like,
this is weird. I don't like this. This is an invasion of my privacy. And yeah, so the creature itself, in its full glory, we haven't really described it fully yet. It is essentially has the body of an elk, but a way bigger elk, and it's almost like moose, but it's also kind of like a giraffe, because that's eventually what they made the legs look like, where they were based off of giraffe legs, because that was the only creature that they could find that actually exists in the human world.
With long ass legs.
Yeah, with long ass legs that could support a giant ass body, and so it has very giraffe like legs. It doesn't. The rest of it isn't very giraffe like, but its legs are giraffe like, and then it has.
Wait.
What?
Sorry, I was just gonna say, which kind of it works so well with the trees, because it's so tall and it's got these very thin legs. So I think the design of the creature was really well done with the combination of the really sticky, like pointy trees that are just so tall and long and thin. So those like gangly, tall ass legs just work really well.
Oh, yeah.
With, like blending in. They
do such a good job of like there's shots throughout the movie, which we don't have to go into detail describing, but they just do such a good job of like there's just scenes where the camera's holding on the forest and you don't really know why it's happening until you see movement and you realize that thing has been in the woods looking at them the whole time. And you can't see it until it moves. The camouflage, the colors of it look just like a tree, and you never get to see its full colors, so you don't really know.
Yeah, it's usually in shadow.
Yeah, it's always nighttime, and so you just know that this thing can blend in perfectly with this environment, and does a really good job of hiding it. And but yeah, this thing, it has, for whatever reason, these horrible like bone spines along its back. They're just these big spikes that shoot all down its spine, and they're just kind of extensions of each of its spinal cord.
It's like a stegosaurus.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's like a stegosaurus, a horrifying elk person stegosaurus. And like its head looks like it kind of would look like a deer head, but it's actually like a weird human torso, and it looks like it has tusks, but they're actually the arms. So the arms are like hand tusks essentially, and that's kind of how it picks everything up and
kind of like they
just kind of dangle
on Spotify or just listening to me go but it's got like its arms just kind of like limply hanging out, and then it can just grab shit really creepily.
And
it can also do the weird praying thing.
That's its own bizarre thing where it's it's so beyond normal, rational look. Like it looks like it's almost two human torsos stacked on top of each other when it decides to unfold its head. And then it also raises its arms like the Wicker Man statues and holds them in a very particular spot. But the actual creature, the concept art was designed by this guy named Keith Thompson, and he is one of Guillermo del Toro's like main creature concept artists, which is perfect for a movie like this. Get a guy who is entire life is dedicated to making horrible monsters come to life, so they really picked the right guy for this, because I don't think I've seen a creature that looks like more Lovecraftian, and they were inspired by Lovecraft, just the idea of something that looks beyond human comprehension. Like you can look at it with your eyes, but you couldn't possibly tell somebody what exactly it is, and they do an amazing job, better than I've seen in almost any movie, of making a creature that looks believably unreal. Like you just have to see it to believe it, just the look of it, because it's just so unnatural. And they do such an amazing job of that. And so the other guys that helped out on it were this guy named Richard Clark, which is he was the head of CG, and he after The Ritual was hired to do Annihilation, which is a perfect transition from spooky god creature in the woods to human bear head that screams like a woman.
That's another good movie.
That's another wonderful one. Yeah, and they
which also has a good book. I mean, the book
it's based on a book as well.
The book is much better than. I mean, no shade to the author of The Ritual, but Annihilation books are really good.
Yeah.
Like throughout, they're good throughout. Yeah.
Yeah, so they do a really amazing job of just creating this creature, and essentially, it's all CG throughout it. And I guess the original concept art of it was the legs were kind of more crab-like. And so when they tried to create that in 3D, they're like, well, this isn't going to work. This is so weird that this giant...
survive in a forest. It would just keep getting stuck.
Like there's a reason why crabs don't live in the woods. They're just not designed for.
Got another forest crab on our hands.
Like, oh my god, a forest! I would hate if there was such a thing as forest crabs. That would be awful.
Spiders are enough. I don't need crabs as well.
I don't worry about crabs in the woods. Their legs would just be so terrible for gripping into loose terrain because all they have is points. You want nice
they're
flat.
good for sand. They're good
they're good. Yeah, because it sinks into sand. It gives you good traction. But if you're on dirt or hills,
So I'm glad they didn't do that. I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah. So they said it looked kind of like it was crippled essentially. So they gave it the giraffe legs. Perfect. And so the woods themselves, it's quite wonderful because the woods that they shot in were actually in Transylvania. which is wonderful.
Of all the places,
right? It is the birthplace of Dracula. How can you get scarier than that? It's the perfect place. Of course, Transylvania has spooky ass woods where you could film a movie about a Nordic being chasing you. It's
remind me to, if I ever go to Transylvania, remind me to never go into its forests.
No, or just like bring a gallon of gasoline with you so you can just burn it to the ground.
Just in case, I'll do the movie exit, not the book exit.
As soon as you find out that there is something in the woods that you have no idea what it is, just burn it to the ground.
Oh yeah.
It'd be better for everybody, anyways. It was really funny because they had a lot of challenges with trying to get the equipment up there because they filmed them in the high mountains.
Yeah,
these very remote woods. So they actually balloon lifted in their equipment with for their generators and stuff. I don't know exactly how that works, if they created a hot air balloon and then floated it up and then over into the woods, or if they dropped it out of an airplane and it just had a balloon parachute thing going on. But
I have no idea. Can you, when you fly an air balloon, can you point it into directions?
Yes, as a person who has been on a hot air balloon trip once in my life, you can move the nozzle and blast it so that it kind of creates air currents. So that's essentially what you're doing to create a hot air balloon. You blast a bunch of fire and it fills up this balloon. And it creates
that's so weird. So they probably did direct it to an area.
Yeah, a bunch of hot air balloons just coming in Transylvania. What's going on here?
Just picture them in those super colorful, red and blue and white hot air balloons. They're just just drop
the Remax balloons. Yeah. It's just a bunch of advertisement for selling houses in Transylvania.
That's so random. Well, they did it. Good on them. That's so much effort. That's what I was telling you before. It's good on the PAs for that trip, because that is I hope they were paid well to get all that equipment out there.
Probably not. They're probably paid stock union wages.
But hey, that movie looks really good on a resume. So.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Yeah, just the character of the forest itself. It's really nice when the environment is its own character. And
it is. And they really did a good job scouting, getting spooky locations that always look different. And I think I watched whatever I could find with interviews on this movie. It was very minimal, but they were talking about how certain parts of the movie, they had to find a certain a denser part of the forest because now they're really fucked in the woods. But in the beginning, when they first get in, it's not quite as dense. And yeah, it's interesting. And there's a different location too for the village, right?
So the village is Transylvania, and the beginning part of the movie is actually Romania. And that's the beginning part of the woods and the really spiky woods. And then when it becomes the more colorful woods, that I believe is Transylvania. And then the final part with because I think the DP on the movie, he said there was this one surreal moment where he was just He's like, it was like 4 a.m. and they were in the village filming the finale of the movie, and he just looked up and saw this like huge full moon, and it just kind of hit him. And he's like, I'm in Transylvania in the middle of the night with this horror movie moon above me, and everything looks scary. Yeah, that would be a fun moment to just be there for that. That would be
really cool. Mm-hmm. That would be really cool, yeah.
So, yeah, you could definitely tell everyone really put in the effort to make sure that... Yeah, it just... The environment
beautiful
was wonderful.
Cinematography. Like, they just did such a good job, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they really used the forest to the best of its ability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was about it. It's kind of hard to find stuff about the creature itself. There wasn't too many making ofs, unfortunately, just because of it being like a Netflix
I was disappointed.
movie.
I was looking at stuff too, and it was just a lot of other people reviewing the movie, or it was like I watched an interview that was hosted by Canon, because that was the
I saw that too. Yeah.
Canon ad for the
They're like, ooh, we got the new Canon 700. It was a prototype from Japan, and
I mean, it kind of was like, ooh, I could get that. No, I'm not going to shoot a horror movie anytime soon.
Oh my god, the amount of like features on that thing would just be nuts to try to figure out.
Oh my god, yeah, I've got like a little tiny Canon power shot or whatever it is.
Yeah, let alone
that little point and shoot Canon camera, and that's as good as it's getting.
Until we become master cinematographers, I think we'll probably be okay with the standard Canon camera.
Yeah. Well, good job though. That's a really good amount of research on the movie, because I could not find that much stuff. So
yeah,
and it was really interesting because I could have sworn watching it that there were more practical effects, but I think the CG team just did a really good job of making it look real, and the lighting was always really well integrated into the movie. Mm-hmm. So they just did a really good job with it.
Yeah, and the minimal amount that you see it throughout the first 2/3 of the movie.
And that's probably also part of it, why it feels like part of it was a lot more of it was practical effects, because that's sort of the technique that people using practical effects will use, is they will do the less is more approach, where it's more in your head and you just sort of see what you need to in the movie. Yeah. And it's nice to see people doing that with CG, because that's kind of my qualm with a lot of the movies these days, especially with VFX, is it's just overused. You see too much of it, and it's just not...
Well, the people are like proud. Yeah, the amount of effort it takes to create one of these creatures. Like, you have to show it all the time because we made it. And it's like that completely deflates any of the tension.
It deflates it, and it also, as an audience member, it kind of makes you feel like you're being spoon-fed the information as well. Mm-hmm. You're not letting the audience do the work and kind of anticipate what's happening. You're not necessarily playing with the audience a little bit, because I think that's important too, where it's like, oh, you're going to see more than you think you're going to see, but it's like, nope, they didn't show anything. They just made me very worried and stressed that I was. So it's kind of, that movie does that a lot, where I expect to see more than I actually do. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a nice change of pace. It's a nice slow burn in a good way.
It's a good slow burn. So yeah, I guess that is the end of our ritual episode. So
go watch the movie if you want to see a wonderful Lovecraftian elk humanoid monster that is a Nordic nightmare.
Exactly. Yeah, it is worth a watch for sure. And I feel like a lot of people that are a little bit more spooked out with gore could probably handle this one.
Yeah, it's got some nice tension.
Yeah, you can do it. Anyways, thank you everybody for listening or watching to Gorehead The Wiener, and until next time, watch horror movies.
Sure.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
All right, podcast's over.